ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this edition of the discursive program Global Insight on For You Media Africa. Today we're going to revisit the stakes in South Africa. It remains still a decisive moment for South Africa even after the May 29 elections. The talks between parties to form a coalition and the incumbent cabinet installed already this July to work with President Cyril Ramaphosa in driving the South African course both at national and international levels. Though some 11 parties formed the coalition to make up the government of national unity in South Africa, doubts still linger in the air pertaining the marriage between South Africa's Independence Party, the African National Congress ANC, and the AG opposition, the Democratic Alliance. Differing ideologies and manifestos have kept South Africans eager to see what the coming months will mean for the political, economic, and social sphere of one of Africa's most buoyant economies. Today, Global Insight engages Dr. Charles SINKALA, an international relations expert, on the prospects of the government of national unity as we continue to watch the events unfolding in South Africa. Stay tuned. This is Global Insight. It is indeed an exclusive moment with Dr. Charles SINKALA, international relations expert, who doubles as President Africa 55 states. We're going straight away to say welcome to Dr. SINKALA as we seek to understand the prospect of South Africa's government of national unity after the cabinet has been reviewed and installed under the leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa. What fate for the South Africa, and of course how will these different political entities form a coalition that will ensure a sustainable political stability and even more economic buoyancy and social benefits across South Africa? Thank you again. Hello to you, Dr. Charles SINKALA, and thank you for accepting to grace our platform this day.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure once again to be onto this platform to share some ideas globally in terms of what is happening on the continent and specifically in South Africa. To give this perspective for those who do not have a background of it, South Africa went into the elections on the 29th of May 2024 to elect a new government. And ever since the ANC, since the 1994, has been the leader in terms of gaining support for more than 50%, which is required for a political party to form government. Having identified that background, unfortunately, this time around, the ANC, which is the African National Congress party, never gained more than 50%. In fact, they had 40% of the votes of the national vote, and at that time it could not let them form government as per the constitution of the Republic of South Africa. Now, it was the decision by not the government, since the government was not formed post the elections. It was the decision by the African National Congress under the leadership of President Cyril Ramaphosa, who decided that they must actually form a government of national unity with political parties who can share the similar ideology, economical policies, for them to add up to more than 50%, which is required for the president to be elected president, and as well as for ANC to form the government. Now, it is important to say as well that, Clarice, that this is not the first time that ANC has gone in bed with the other political parties. Yeah. We remember as well in 1994 elections, there was a government of national unity, which of course IFP, the Inkatha Freedom Party, who is now part of the government of national unity, was as well part of that government. Yeah. But this time around is quite different because the majority of the other political parties, especially those who are pro-black people, those who would like to alleviate the poverty in South Africa, and those who are actually the factions of the African National Congress, did not fully participate. You know, the parties such as the MK Party, which was founded by the former President Jacob Zuma, and many others who has been viewed that they are not part of the government of national unity. In fact, many analysts share my view that, you know, this is not a government of national unity. It is actually a coalition of political parties to have the purpose of actually forming government. But of course, we need to understand as well, forming government is one thing. Now, the governance and aligning those policies, as you have likely mentioned into your introduction, how can all these political parties align themselves, especially now when we have the DA. The DA was the national party where the ANC fought the apartheid government in 1994. Now they are part of the government. And of course, they've been pro, nationalism, and as well they've been against Section 25, which is the expropriation of land without compensation, which the ANC would like to pursue. But I think now it is going to be a stalemate.
Thank you so much for the insightful introduction to our topic for discussion, of course, which has brought us to some of the points we highlighted in the preamble, the feasibility of the coalition government. Also asking a question because some pundits feel like it is not a government of national unity, rather a government of national disunity in court. And we can hear from Dr. Sinkala underlining that he sees that to be a coalition of political parties. What stakes or what should we expect in the coming months as we continue to watch the political landscape of South Africa? Before entering again into the further comprehension of our topic for discussion, let's invite, listen to this excerpt of President Cyril Ramaphosa when he was about to unveil or to make public the cabinet, and some of the points he highlighted as he addressed the nation, unveiling the new cabinet that will carry on the agenda of South Africans both at national and international levels. Let's listen to President Cyril Ramaphosa, and I will join you right after that. Yes, we continue to interrogate what lies ahead for the government of South Africa, and to note that it is not the first time that we are seeing a coalition of parties coming together, but these are different time zones happening or periods, and 1994 and today we are in 2024. What are the stakes and what makes it different? And of course, those political parties that make up the coalition government, what is the agenda, and is it to drive the South African cause? We go to listen to Cyril Ramaphosa.
This government of national unity would be bound by certain fundamental principles and would undertake a basic minimum of program of priorities that affect the lives of the people of South Africa. Following discussions over the course of the last few weeks, a total of 11 parties have elected to work together in government as well as in parliament. These are the African National Congress, the Democratic Alliance, the Patriotic Alliance, the Inkatha Freedom Party, Good Party, Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, Freedom Front Plus, United Democratic Movement, Al-Jamaa, Rise Mzansi, and the United African Transformation. The partnership between the GNU parties is guided by a statement of intent which outlines fundamental principles and a minimum program of priorities. All the parties have made a commitment in writing to respect the Constitution and to promote accountable and transparent governance, evidence-based policies, and decision-making. the professionalization of our public service based on integrity and good governance. The incoming government will prioritize rapid, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth and the creation of a more just society by tackling poverty and inequality, as well as unemployment. The establishment of the Government of National Unity in its current form is unprecedented in the history of our democracy. We have had to consider how to form a new government in a manner that advances the national interest, that also gives due consideration to the outcome of the election and that makes use of the respective capabilities within each of the parties represented. We have had to consider not only the immediate needs of the country, but the needs of all our people. We have also had to consider the stability, effectiveness, and the durability of the government that we are establishing. It is true that some South Africans have expressed concern about the length of time it has taken to form a government since the elections. As the discussions have unfolded, they have been worried about the effect of a protracted process on confidence and the stability of the country. At the same time, many people have pointed to the experiences of other countries that have far longer history in democracy, where the formation of multi-party governments have sometimes taken several months. In one case, formation of a government took more than a year. As a relatively young democracy, we should be proud that we have moved to establish a government comprised of a number of parties within such a short space of time. Through our discussions, we have been able to build consensus on the tasks of government. We have shown that there are no problems that are too difficult or too intractable that they cannot be solved through dialogue and negotiations.
And of course, that was the President of the Republic of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. We continue the discussion with you, having listened to the points highlighted by Cyril Ramaphosa. Dr. Charles Sinkala, the question is, what are your thoughts on the recent cabinet appointment under the Government of National Unity, or maybe call it the coalition of political parties in this present dispensation in South Africa?
In my view, I think the appointments of the cabinet was well thoughtful in the fact that they represented the diverse in terms of the coalition political parties that are formed what you call the Government of National Unity. And I think it is high time that as we call for the unity of Africa, we have to form such governments, whether or not it is a coalition of the Government of Unity, where we have professional parties who speaks very nicely in the opposition. So we anticipate a very predominant type of approach, and I think economically South Africa now will start reviving if what we saw from the DA's point of submission in terms of how well they might have governed the Western Cape, and as well as other political parties. Although other sectors of society has questioned the appointment, which is usually the case in a democratic society, others will have their different views in terms of what exactly they want and which candidate they want. Yeah. You know, it is always difficult in a democratic society to please everyone. But government has been formed, and I think like what we've had in the excerpt from the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, it was an historical moment that other nations, especially on the African continent, we have seen what has happened in the Democratic Republic of Congo not long ago when Joseph Kabila was the president. At one time, he asked the people of DRC that there was no money to hold elections, and they had to go on and on and on for years until the elections they came. South Africa has demonstrated a democratic society that they can be faced with challenges, and within short time they can turn around and have the confidence of the people to move the country forward. I think that is a very good approach in terms of demonstrating to the rest of the African continent as an inspiration.
Indeed, given the plight of Africa in present society, how can we unite for the common good to advance the agenda of the continent, while particularizing with South Africa, Dr. Sinkala, incumbent Cyril Ramaphosa, while announcing the proposed, government of national unity, noted that the coming together of political parties was, in quote, best option to move South Africa forward for the next 5 years. Let's look at given the viewpoint of South Africans, because after the announcement of the cabinet, we saw mixed reactions. Is this really realistic, and does South Africa need this to solve issues, especially issues that include xenophobia and other aspects that were pitting South Africans between two camps, the blacks and the whites?
On the political sphere, not only in the African continent, internationally, globally, the geopolitics tells us that part of the confusion has been due to the rivals between political parties. We can see how Parliament has been engulfed with differences, court cases, and others, which actually destabilizes the working together culture. The inclusivity of such governments, such as what has been formed in South Africa, demonstrates that they'll have little or no time taking political opponents to court. They actually political opponents, which was the biggest political party, the Democratic Alliance, has been part of the government as we are speaking. So in that way, we've got quite a lot of advantages, even though that society might not like the DA, and of course that even if the intention was only to reach the threshold of 50% plus, to be the majority to form government, but working together culture on the political space is more important than having so many political parties who are divided. For those others who are thinking they are better only when they are voted into government, when they leave the government, they shall change the things. But now here comes a chance, on the silver plate, that those opposition political parties shall be part of the government for the success of the government.
Indeed, for the success of the government that will transcend into the, policies and decisions that will actually benefit the South Africans in entirety. You're talking about political parties gaining some, we call it political majority, and trying to carve a competitive advantage of political unity towards advancing the agenda of South Africa. Dr. Sinkala, let's look at how these political parties, if actually people are talking today in South Africa and elsewhere in Africa, particularly as patterning the marriage between the Democratic Alliance and the African National Congress, is because of some of the complexities that have always existed between these two parties. And then we see in 2024 these parties coming together. Is it to attain a political objective, or is it to, drive the South African agenda forward? So, being a multi-party coalition, the government of national unity is expected to come in different forms. can we try to understand some of these peculiarities of the government of national unity as we continue to watch and see how the cabinet that should be sitting for the first time in mid-July this year will advance the work that will, turn things around, especially at the political scene in South Africa?
That is a very good perspective. We have to hope for the best, but given circumstances where the ANC has been at this stage, if they had any option, I think they shouldn't have chosen the DA to work with them. I think the African National Congress, since the 1904 or 1906, when the African National Congress was formed, was actually to fight against the white monopoly capital, which was the National Party, which tended to be the DA. And if one can ask the question, if there was no such predicament in South Africa, for them gaining less than 50%, would they be in bed with such a political party? Of course not. They had no option because they actually managed to put everything aside politically and policy-wise for them just to form the government. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, Clarice, we need to understand that teaming up such a coalition, it is very easy. That's why it was done with a historical record time. But as you likely mentioned, the cabinet which we shall sit, the first cabinet which shall sit, most of them they've got different ideologies, most of them they've got different perspectives in terms of running South Africa. It is from that point that there will be such a biggest compromise. And of course, the leopard does not hide its marks. They can hide it, but sooner or later, we shall see that political parties within the spheres shall not agree to certain decisions that will be made by other parties who are in the coalition. And I think that will bring destabilization, as we have seen the fall of the marriage between the MDC and the ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, when the late Morgan Shanglai was appointed as a prime minister under Robert Gabriel Mugabe. May he so rest in peace. It was such a mess for them to work together. And we hope that South Africa will build from there, and it has grown from there to make sure that they must be resilient and compromise in terms of policy to serve the people of South Africa, and to make it an example for the rest of the African continent, that indeed, although we have so many political parties on the continent, there is such a time that we can work together.
Indeed, there is time for political parties to work together to drive the agenda of a nation or a continent. While you were talking earlier on, I could see the images of, South Africa's Foreign Affairs Minister, who is former now, Naledi Pandor, which takes me to the next question, which I think is very important in today's world. We're looking at South Africa's position in the international arena. South Africa happens to be one of those nations in Africa that has a strong voice on, international issues, and also being a member of important organization like the BRICS bloc, which is advocating today the philosophy or ideology of multipolarity. We want to see how, the replacement of Naledi Pandor will not, if this will actually, shaken negatively or positively, or maybe remain on the balance, the position of South Africa on the international issues pertaining, especially global issues. We know the role South Africa played in the crisis in the Middle East, that is the crisis in the Gaza Strip, and other areas where the international relations minister Pandor has been very, very categorical and vocal, decrying and making that the voice of not just South Africa is heard, but Africa's voice is heard at the international arena. So where do you see a major shift coming towards South Africa's international or foreign policy as pertaining this cabinet shakeup?
I wouldn't see anything much, because we can see that South Africa transitioned from the parliamentary types of supremacy to the constitutionalism of the country. The inauguration of the 1996 Constitution of the Republic of South Africa as the supreme law of the land. Not anyone can easily change the perspective in terms of foreign policy, national policy, and Chapter 2 of the Bill of Rights. Having said that, everyone, whoever, even if they may have a different perspective in terms of how the foreign policy should be, especially where we have seen that the DA, they were supporting Israel instead of Palestine, which South Africa wholeheartedly has been supporting. I think when they come into the government, we saw that they were sworn in as cabinet ministers, that they shall uphold the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. Of course, there anyone, even if you do not understand, you shall conform yourself in terms of representing the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. Yes, many criticized South Africa's position, even taking Israel to the International Criminal Court and the tribunals, and as well how they have viewed themselves in terms of the geopolitics of the world and the wars, as well as the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and many others, and as well as their gender policy in terms of Libya and as well as Cuba. They were never going to change those policies, as I've likely mentioned, but these are cast into the Constitution. For them to change the international foreign policy, they have to revisit again the Constitution.
Yeah, looking at the Constitution that I can, say is the future or holds the future of a nation. We are not actually anticipating for a failure of this government of national unity in South Africa, like you highlighted earlier on, Dr. Sinkala. It was formed in 1994. It was a necessity, and then now in 2024 we're still seeing the same, but now with the different stakes. Should the national government of national unity fail to meet the objectives of advancing, like it was stated in the statement made by the political parties on how they are supposed to function under this new dispensation, they have the capacity or the assignment to ensure political stability and also see that there is economic transformation that will lead to buoyancy and later transcend to changing the livelihoods of South Africa. Should this fail to meet the objective because of some political differences, do you think there is a need to revisit the Constitution and maybe change from this parliamentary form where you must garner this amount of of seats to be able to be at the helm, or what can we say practically are the elements that we can envisage in inculcating in the political life of South Africa to mitigate some of the adverse effects that could stem from a coalition government?
It is sad to note that that might be an option, but I don't think that would be an option, because to change the Constitution to suit a certain environment, it is something that is working against the wind. It is not easy to change the South African Constitution. Yes, the aspect in terms of the reason for the government of national unity in 1994 was to pave way of the transition in terms of the apartheid government to the new democratic government, where the new constitution was supposed to be adopted before the formation of the government. I think the new constitution started in 1993 as the interim constitution, and it was also confirmed in 1996. So between that period, political parties had agreed to work together in terms of the interim. What is different from now is that the constitution has been adopted already. Whether or not the different political parties that are part of this coalition or government of national unity disagree in terms of how to look after the economy and the people of South Africa, it is irrelevant. They've got an option to opt out from the coalition, or actually what has been created now is where there is differences that are material, then there is a body which has been created for them to iron out those differences. It's unlikely for them to disband, because that will give a very bad effect in terms of who is the government. For instance, if DA has to pull out, from the coalition of their 23%, which they participated to support the ANC to form government, that will greatly bring up a very big gap in terms of the government to stand. But of course, they've got an option to go renegotiate to other political parties, such as the MK party, the EFF party, and the other parties for them to form the government. What has been created now, I think it is a new norm in terms of the government. I also think that there will be success in terms of the government of national unity. They will seek to put behind their differences in terms of who is leading who. They will try to work together, even if there will be some differences, but those differences shall be taken to a tribunal where they will be distinguished to look at the bigger picture.
Indeed, it's about looking at the bigger picture and the future of South Africa and South Africans. Dr. Sinkala, while talking earlier on, you mentioned that, the analysis or the insight will not only pertain to South Africa, but then we're looking at how this is driving the course in Africa as a whole. Let's take some examples of countries where we have seen some sort of, politicians coming together for a common good, but in the long run, there are differences of political aspirations, bring countries or a nation in limbo. Let's cite the case of South Sudan. In 2011, there was some sort of euphoria that South Sudan got its independence. We saw Salva Kiir, Riek Machar, and other, politicians jubilating. We also look at the situation in the Central African Republic some time ago, when former President Francois Bozize was not able to, to contest the elections. He resulted in joining or being the leader of a rebel group to be able to shaken the government of Touadera. I'm bringing all these, examples for us to see to what level political disparities or different ideologies or manifestos by politicians end up largely bringing more disunity in a country rather than, solidifying for a common good. How can South Africa, in this new dispensation of a government of national unity, avert such a scenario from happening? It's now that South Sudan is anticipating holding elections since 2011. You now understand the complexities of issues pertaining the political scene of countries in Africa. And how can South Africa make a difference with this new road that it has taken?
Well, South Sudan, Central African Republic, and many other countries are ruled by the fist in terms of presidential powers. Unlike South Africa, who has the constitution as supreme. it is quite different that we will expect such, divisions in terms of South African trying to work together. Yes, there could be some other elements. We can see that also in Inkatha Freedom Party, they had to be part of government in 1994 in terms of the government of national unity, but later they had to disband the ANC organization to move and become independently contest against the government. But there's other political parties such as the South African Communist Party, who has been with the ANC since time of memorial and inception of the GNU. But there's always possibilities where there's coalitions or governments trying to work together. In fact, when you look at the African continent, people like themselves. It's not to the perspective that we would like to create rebel movements to dethrone the government or elected government. It is the third parties that are involved, that have got ill intentions in terms of these nations, who goes to different parties, offer them lucrative money that you need to be in power so that we can get the resources of the country. And it is from that emanates the divisions within those citizens of those countries. But South Africa is quite different. But nothing is different, or nothing can not be shocked in the political scenario. But I'm very confident where I'm speaking that such divisions cannot come to South Africa. South Africa has got a very different type of system in terms of working with opposition political parties. I participated in working in the National Assembly and the Council for Provinces in Parliament in Cape Town. I knew and saw that opposition political parties, whether they are in the government of national unity or not, they are selected also to participate in certain committees within the National Assembly to participate. So there is a different culture already, which demonstrates that there is a working government. Yes, you can see in the National Assembly of South Africa where the EFF, the last 5 years, they took on the government to hold them account. But behind closed doors, you can simply see that the EFF, the Julius Malema, they sit in certain committees, even to the appointment of judges. I'm sure you must have seen that the leader of the EFF participated in the appointment of the current Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. But unlike other countries where opposition political parties, they just want to play the role of being opposition. Such countries I can think of is my country, Zambia, where President HH was appointed in 2021 to run through the activities and the economic hardships through the COVID pandemic, trying to rebuild the country from indebtedness and many others. And the former political party, the PF, has tried by all means to destabilize his governance, and failing to work together. It is quite unfortunate that we have those countries, such as my country, that will demonstrate, because they are opposition political parties, they must oppose everything, even the good thing that the current government is doing. But the culture of South Africa, that's why you see in the mapping of Africa, we can see that South Africa is the bottom of the Africa. That's why it's demonstrating that there is leadership that can emanate even in the times of adversities where there's confusion. But the working culture in South Africa with other opposition political parties is quite conducive.
Indeed, it's quite conducive listening to you keenly. You mentioned that the discrepancies that exist between political parties always give room for the third party to infiltrate a nation. And earlier on, we were looking at the position of South Africa, which you underlined, the fact that the Democratic Alliance leader aligns with Israel, but then the ANC is with Palestine. Let's look at it from a geopolitical perspective, Dr. Sinkala. it's a moment, I call it a new quest for the African continent, where we see nations carving their own niche to be able to, foster corporations. So with this disparity, especially on the case in the Middle East, don't you think it's already a very fragile point which we need to look deep into to ensure that along geopolitical lines, these political parties, particularly the DA and the ANC, have to be more, solidified or more intentional about not missing the objective of the government of national unity by not allowing their different, political affiliations or geopolitical affiliations with international, countries to derail the purpose of the government of national unity. How can they do this?
Well, it is not up to the government of national unity. I think, Klaus, we must point out, especially to the viewers, to understand that there is a state. That's why you find that in nations such as the Lesotho, in nations such as the United Kingdom, in nations such as Eswatini, which was formerly Swaziland, they have the king. Let me give an example of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, the head in the state is the King Charles. So even if the Prime Minister would like to do other agenda, they're still answerable to the Supreme Leader, who is the king, for them to conduct the business of the government. Unlike countries such as South Africa, where their supreme leader is a constitution, the constitution holds the state. That's why you find that the heads of states, they are called the heads of state and government. But for the United Kingdom and these other monarchs which I've mentioned, the head of state is actually the monarch, and the head of government is a prime minister. So those two different things are quite different in terms of the execution. So even if the prime minister, who is the head of government, would like to change now the narrative in terms of which new friends or which new allies which they have to align with geopolitically in terms of the world, it cannot happen, because these alliance and the treaties were signed many years ago. For you to break those relationships is going to be very, very difficult for your country. In fact, you'll be creating more enemies than the temporary enemies that you create. I give an example. South Africa has aligned herself to Russia rather than Ukraine, although yes, they entertain the Ukraine in South Africa for having an embassy, but their actions, are simply in black and white, that they remain neutral because they know that their ally is Russia. Same with what is happening in the Middle East. They've got their own treaties which they have signed with Palestine, and whoever who wants to come and say no, stop supporting Palestine, and now you must go to start supporting Israel, which Israel they called apartheid state. That cannot happen. They go to the constitution, they go to the state, which is silent, rather than the king, who you can go to and speak to, whether you want to change those. But the state is silent. These governments are appointed. That's why these governments can be replaced. So whatever people they have in the opposition, that when I come into government, I shall do this, I shall do this. You are still answerable. You are codified and answerable to the state and the constitution, that everything you do, that's why you are sworn in, or you make an affirmation that I shall be able to abide to the constitution, uphold the constitution, and represent the constitution. So you want to go there and do something against your employer. It's unprecedented, and it will never going to happen. You just find yourself out in terms of fighting that battle.
And of course, that is the bottom line that has to be fixed as far as Africa is concerned, and African politicians, to be precise, Dr. Sinkala, if you're talking about people, pledging to respect or to abide to the Constitution, we begin to cite some of the, political decisions, which some politicians, like you mentioned earlier on, especially the opposition, when the take the helm, they feel like I have to, challenge my predecessor by doing what maybe adhering to what he did not want, and I think that is what has, brought about some differences and chaos in some countries. Taking the example of Zambia, when Yahya Jammeh left and Adama Barrow came, the first thing was to announce that Zambia is rejoining the International Criminal Court, what his predecessor actually kicked against. We continue to understand some of these, decisions
Gambia,
taken by
not Zambia.
politicians,
Yeah.
and the ramifications of such on the stability, political stability, and economic transformation of the country, and how some of these decisions can even derail, the trajectory set aside or underlined by the preamble of various political parties. Like the case in South Africa, there is a statement, that binds all these political leaders that work together. Let's come again to understand, analyze critically, understanding the stakes, Dr. Sinkala. When you look at very important personality like the former African National Congress Secretary General, that is Magashule, while reacting to all of these developments happening in South Africa and the government of national unity, he called it a government of national disunity. Can you, elaborate or elucidate more on a statement that is coming from somebody who has held that very important position at the Independence Party, the ANC?
Well, I have high regard for my brother S. Magashule. Yes, indeed, he was a very senior man at one time in the African National Congress. He also held a very senior position as a premier in the Free State in South Africa, and he was one of the top 6 of the African National Congress. But his exit from the ANC was actually very sad, for him. And I call him one of the disgruntled members of the ANC who were not actually happy, including the former president, Jacob Zuma, who later formed the MK party. Yes, you have that view, and I definitely understand that it is a disgruntled government of national unity, or it's a disaster. But given a neutral person, who look at building the country beyond any differences, either factions from the African National Congress, political parties, or factions within government, we hope for the best that the government of national unity works together, because at the end of the day, it's the ordinary citizen of South Africa, and as well as the Africa and the investors who's looking at South Africa. How is it tackling the issues? You remember an African proverb, which is well known, that if the 2 elephants are fighting, always the grass suffers. But if you have the perspective of minding the grass, especially in this case, that the people of South Africa, the people of the Africa in particular, they shall suffer. You shall make sure that that government of national unity puts everything aside, differences, as we have seen that President Cyril Ramaphosa touched on to that they shall work towards rebuilding of the nation, rather than looking at the factions as whether or not it should have been part of the government of national unity. Given some circumstances, if he was still the Secretary General of the African National Congress, I don't think he should have made that comment.
Thank you so much. Just to remind our viewers tuning in that this is Global Insight on For You Media Africa, where we indulge experts to give insight and discursive analysis and constructive analysis on issues affecting the African continent and how we can use this platform to chart a clear and defined African agenda that will advance the cause of the continent on issues of pertinent, particular to the continent and also at the international arena. We continue to look at the stakes or prospects of South Africa's government of national unity, what to expect in the months ahead, noticing that the government or the cabinet will be meeting for the first time in July to kick off negotiations or talks that will advance the agenda of the South Africa and try to answer some of the questions that still linger in the minds of South Africans looking at the outcome of this government of national unity, particularly that South Africa's ANC is coming together for a common cause with the opposition party, the Democratic Alliance. Talking about the Democratic Alliance, let's go listen now to the short speech made by the leader of the Democratic Alliance, accepting that they are going to work for the good of South Africans. This was as his speech came as President Cyril Ramaphosa made public the new cabinet that will push South Africa forward. Let's listen. I'll join you right after that.
The DA has taken up the following portfolios in cabinet: agriculture, basic education, public works and infrastructure, forestry, fisheries and environment, home affairs, as well as communications and digital technologies. The DA has further assumed deputy minister posts in the portfolios of finance, trade, industry and competition, higher education, energy and electricity, water and sanitation, as well as small business development. The configuration that we have managed to negotiate ensures that alongside the ANC, the DA is the only other party that is now represented across every one of the clusters in government.
John Steenhuisen, the president of the Democratic Alliance Party, and now he has assumed the position of the Minister for Agriculture in South Africa. This brings us to, analyzing the land reform or the land saga in South Africa, and how this position, if it will actually, spike South Africans, or it will unite in solving the issue of inequality and other aspects that relates to land ownership in South Africa. Dr. Sinkala.
Yes, it is a very sensitive matter in terms of the land issue. Many South Africans were displaced during the apartheid time, and they have the view that they have to expropriate land without compensation. Section 25 of the Constitution, which is still under discussion, was not concluded. But I think in terms of many also white South Africans, the Boers who had farms, they were threatened in terms of staying or continuing staying in South Africa, and many of them moved outside the country. They went especially to Australia, Canada, Netherlands, Zambia, and Zimbabwe before. But, this, I think, especially where now the leader of the DA, Steenhuisen, has been appointed as a Minister of Agriculture, I think they will delay or defer that expropriation of land without compensation to revisit that Section 25 to make sure that they do not destabilize the country and threaten the food security of the country, like what happened in the year 2001 in Zimbabwe, where white farmers were displaced, and we have seen the effect of that expropriation of land without compensation by those commercial farmers who are legitimately utilizing the land. But it is a sensitive issue that we are very excited, to see how they're going to tackle it. I think they will compromise. This marriage is, where both parties have to compromise in terms of certain things, especially ANC will have to compromise in terms of the BEE policies, and as well as the DA has to compromise certain policies, especially in the land without expropriating land without compensation.
Okay, thank you. Let's visit the statements or some of the peculiarities of the statement made by the government of national unity, which let's look at where this said, in line, of course, with the land issues and fighting the issue of inequality. It said that was, in the preamble, number 3, that at this historic juncture, because it's actually a historic moment for South Africa with this new political dispensation, we must act to ensure stability and peace, tackling the triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, entrench constitutional democracy and the rule of law, and to build a South Africa for all its people. Do you already see any, or can you propose a modus operandi that, these stakeholders in the GNU can actually, adopt to be able to meet the objective and not to maybe sway from the defined objectives as spelled in the preamble?
Yes, indeed. We cannot forget the inequalities which happened during the apartheid time. It is quite unfortunate that a lot of black communities were segregated during the apartheid time. A lot of them were never in employment or formal employment, rather. But, this is a different time. This is a different time in the sense that the employment, in my view, that I understand that it will never going to be created internally. The only way you can create employment for many of the South Africans, the African people, is to start the industrialization of the African continent, to stop the importation of things, things that can be produced locally. The importation of toothpicks that I always talk about, has to stop. We've got so much land, we've got so much trees that our industrialization shall give the meaning in terms of producing the complete value chain of products within the African continent. So is South Africa. Most of these unemployment levels in South Africa are affected, not because of the government lack of finding work for them, but for the lack of government putting a stop on terms of, or regulated rather, the importation of things that can be manufactured within the South African borders. And this also destabilizes the manufacturing industries, who finds the cost of manufacturing within the country very high as compared of this drop shipping importation from the outside. I think this new government shall look at solidifying those types of policies so that they ensure that they start building up the countries to be self-reliant than to be dependent while they claim to be independent from 1994.
Self-reliance and talking about moving from a consumer to a production, continent. It brings us again to some fundamental elements which are outlined in the principles of the GNU in South Africa. The aspects of accountability, transparency, and participation in community participation in government, in meeting the set objectives, and of course what are those governance models which can be inculcated in this GNU to meet the objective of what you just outlined right now, stop the importation of things that can be produced locally? How can we use the aspect of accountability, transparency, and governance to attain such a milestone in South Africa and elsewhere across Africa?
We have on the continent the problem, not only on the continent, but internationally, issues such as corruption, and lack of accountability, lack of consequence management, lack of holding those who've been found with corrupt activities, finding themselves to court. I think because of the artificial intelligence, the industrialization of mixing technology with the e-government, shall give a meaning in terms of very few interaction in terms of processes with human beings. The systems has to be built that are impenetrable, that one cannot circumvent the law. One will conform to participating in working towards the common goal. I think the government of national unity has brought up that perspective in terms of different role players, especially the DA, who claims that they govern the Western Cape, one of the provinces in South Africa, better than the other provinces that were governed by the African National Congress over the past 30 years.
Yeah.
That gives a good new ideas, that we shall, make sure that the accountability and as well as the managing of the public resources, as the Public Financial Management Act is adhered to, checks and balances are monitored all the time to make sure that there's no slippage of money or there's no corruption that takes place in exchange of the plight for the poor people in South Africa.
Very imperative for understanding how we can chart the way forward. If you are tuning in, this is Global Insight. We continue with this exclusive, program with Dr. Charles Sinkala to understand the peculiarities of the government of national unity in South Africa and the stakes that lie ahead as the cabinet kickstarts the work that will take South Africa to the next 5 years. That is the tenure of this government after the May 29, 2024 presidential elections that left a decisive moment for South Africa as they continue to watch the political unfoldment pertaining the government of national unity. We are actually looking at the way forward for South Africa, Dr. Sinkala, and while talking about this coalition, you mentioned earlier on, and I wish to reiterate the absence of likes like the MK party of former President Jacob Zuma, and then the Economic Freedom Fighters Party of Julius Malema, and other very prominent politicians across South Africa. What do you think can be the message for these political parties that have not accepted the turn of things in South Africa, that will make them consider the interests of South Africa before the political aspirations of nations, and maybe align to see what the GNU has to offer in the months ahead before some declarations or actions can be taken from these other political parties that are not part of the GNU but have a strong voice in South Africa?
Well, after the announcement by President Cyril Ramaphosa that they'll invite, they have to form a government of national unity, they invited all political parties. But it is through those negotiations that other political parties, such as the EFF, probably they might have needed a position of deputy president. A rumor has it that they needed some certain key roles if they have to be part of the African National Congress. The MK party under former President Jacob Zuma, as well, they were not short of their demands in terms of what they need if they have to be part of the government of national unity. So it is from those arrangements, especially with the MK party, they actually wanted the neck in the head of the president of the African National Congress, President Cyril Ramaphosa, that he must step down as the head of the government, that the ANC should choose a different leader. So it is through those negotiations that some of them remain unpractical for especially the ANC, which is in the forefront of the government of national unity. So it is incorrect statement if the public can have the view that the other political parties were not invited or they were not accepted. In fact, leading to the formation of the government of national unity, we could hear that the EFF now, sent some communication that they want to be part of it, but it was too late, So it is those negotiations and the demands that were unattainable by the African National Congress. In fact, the Secretary General of the ANC, Fikile Mbalula, mentioned at one stage that they should not be controlled or swayed by the opposition political parties. They shouldn't think that the ANC, it is actually desperate to form government. They had a lot of options. In fact, they took the latter option. But if you look at the EFF, the Economic Freedom Party, and as well as the MK Party, these are factions of the African National Congress. I think it's supposed to take a total diligence and total principles for them to go back to the ANC and start working with them, especially when the leaders who are there are the ones who actually made it very difficult for them to work within the ranks of the ANC. That's why they formed the opposition political parties. But, political parties are political parties. We need as well opposition political parties in parliament to keep their checks and balances for the current government. So not all of them could have been formed in the government of national unity, but it would have been a sense of the direction of moving forward as a country, South Africa, to have most of the political parties opposition, especially the bigger chunks like the MK party and the EFF, who has been very critical of the African National Congress, to be part of the government, not only on the local government, but as well as on the national and provincial governments.
Okay, thank you so much for the clarification and insight on that very important aspect, which remains very fragile as far as the political scene of South Africa is concerned. Dr. Sinkala, we are revisiting scenarios that led to the formation of the coalition government, and even, especially between the DA and the ANC. There was actually a delay in the cabinet appointment due to, the discrepancies or the wrangling of portfolios and other, aspects that could characterize the political parties, the 11 parties coming under the umbrella of the GNU. How do you think this prolonged negotiation, period might have influenced the effectiveness and, stability of the new government? And do you maybe think the compromises made are in line with the governing role, that is the Constitution of South Africa, and not, aligning with political aspirations of these leaders of the parties forming the GNU?
The delay was actually a production. I think the delay meant that both the opposition and the current government, the ANC, who was the majority with the 40%, were given ample time to do legal consultation, in terms of this marriage that would have been made. I think the other aspect was as well in terms of mitigating the risks, and as well as mitigating whatever reason, if there will be any difference, how do they tackle that thing? This is an organization, GNU, where different parties, like what you've mentioned, they've got different ideologies and different perspectives that they were supposed to be aligned. So it is through that delay that, the government of national unity has been formed. And I think extensively, they did quite a lot of consultation. And, we look forward to a success in terms of them managing. We hope to hear what is happening. I think now we've had those ministers who has been sworn in already. They've started the action of working, and we shall see after the direction of the cabinet meeting, which shall take place this month, on what direction or what directives, which aspect they're going to start working first with, in terms of moving the country forward.
Indeed, talking about moving the country forward, we touch the aspect of, trade or international trade, and let's look at the composition of the ministers. Maybe some ministers, or the appointment came, and some people are assuming these offices for the first time. And looking at that, South Africa is a nation that has, trade relations with even the European Union, and they have been enjoying a solid relationship, and even with other countries that could advance, the agenda of South Africa forward. Could this actually, the fact that some of these personalities have limited experiences, could these limits have an impact on the trade relations between South Africa and other partners? And if yes, what can we anticipate already as a way, a mechanism to, put these ministries on track, on the right trajectory that will, take over faster, so that the development process is not delayed by the changes which have occurred so far in the parliament and in the GNU?
Well, it's not much of the difference that one can point at, that it's a new government which has been formed. The government of the African National Congress has been there since 1994. And talking about the changes, it was actually cosmetic changes in terms of the ministerial positions. Those who's been appointed, they might be new, but they've got a full backing of the director generals who are civil servants running those ministries. For instance, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and international cooperation has been run by the civil servant, the highest civil servant, who is the director general. That one continues to do his aspects. Those has never been affected. Yes, he might have, or she might have, a new boss who is a political influence who come to that, but they know they also operate according to the constitution. And nothing more of the changes or any differences in terms of the perspective, in terms of the international trade, or in fact the geopolitics of the world, that shall bring other changes. But if at all changes has to come, it's improvement to the existing relations.
Okay, thank you for that. We are almost culminating, but then we still have some few questions which I think are imperative. Dr. Sinkala, with your expertise, we can bring greater insight on these very important aspects. Let's look at the aspect of the formation of the government of national unity is already a reality in South Africa, and we talked about the fact that the political parties, particularly Jacob Zuma's MK party, and the EFF of Julius Malema and others, actually, you mentioned that their stay in parliament will help to check the involvement of, of the cabinet in charting, meeting the objectives of the country like South Africa. Now, we are looking at the South Africa in a government of national unity in 2024 with a lot of involvement which have occurred in the global world and has affected cooperation in every dimension. Let's look at the benefits of this government of national unity for South Africa, the benefits of a diversity, government in charting the South Africans, agenda at the international level particularly and across the continent Africa in promoting the African continental free trade area that will lead Africa, I think, to that area where you mentioned earlier on that it is imperative that Africa moves from a consumer to a production, producing continent. How can this advocate? Yeah?
Yeah, yes, it is quite, it's also another African proverb that says that two heads is better than one head.
Yeah.
The inclusivity of the government of national unity gives that spectrum of options and expertise that will build the nation. Yes, Africa suffers from one common problem in terms of being a consumer because of many products, especially from China, being dumped on the African continent, which automatically stops the production and manufacturing of these products within the African continent. South Africa stands also to lose if they are to continue in terms of that trajectory without realizing that the cause of unemployment and other vices and economic hardship has been a result of dumping of products from outside, which essentially takes out the employment opportunities within the African borders and creates employment within the Asian community where these products are produced. But, having also that type of set gives a lot of advantage, because now ANC will never be dominated by a lot of opposition political parties. Yes, there will be the MK who will be very noisy, I anticipate, in parliament in terms of condemning, one, the government of national unity, two, they'll condemn as well the ANC as they have continued. We've got also the Action SA, which actually literally refused that I cannot work with government of national unity of the ANC because these are corrupt people or politicians or organization which has actually brought it down the South African economy down to its knees. We shall see what will happen there, but of course electorates and many of the people of South Africa, you can see now the economy has transitioned through the election period. They've continued their agenda. I think there's very high hopes in terms of seeing what now South Africa will be in the next a year, up to 5 years until the other next elections they come.
Talking about diversity in government and particular in South Africa, in your own perspective, Dr. Sinkala, what difference in line with policy making will it make with the involvement of other political parties in the governing ANC, looking at political plurality in governance in South Africa? How is it going to impact policy making and governance in South Africa as a whole in every aspect or dimension?
The only impact that I can see, in my view, that it will be a very lengthy consultative process. It won't be an easy one to make policy, or adjust policy, because now the orders, it's not only the Tuli House as an ANC political party to decide what policies they have to do in the Ministry of Finance, to decide what policy they have to do in the Ministry of Agriculture or Education, or many. They've got now stakeholders, including the opposition political parties, and notwithstanding also Parliament will be at the center to verify and make sure that the efficacy of those policies that have been made speaks to the agenda that they would like to pursue for both of them, and not only individual agendas as political parties.
Okay, we are culminating, meeting in mid-July. The cabinet will actually anticipate, or what do you think will be the focus of this meeting, and a new direction that the cabinet can take in addressing some of the issues faced by South Africa, particularly, it's true that you mentioned it earlier on, the land reforms, international trade, disparities or dispute, and some economic recovery strategies that we can anticipate or expect from this new cabinet.
Has given them tasks now that they are appointed, that in the next sitting of cabinet they shall produce a strategic plan, that to tackle issues such as the challenges that they have within the departments or ministries, and how they can overcome, and how they would like his guidance, to make sure that they start with that. Of course, from those DA cabinet ministers who has been appointed, the IFP cabinet ministers, and as well as the Patriotic Alliance, who have their agenda as well, looking at their
we apologize for the interruption of course, ladies and gentlemen. That was actually a concluding phase from Dr. Charles Sinkala, International Relations Expert, President, Africa 55 states, exclusively giving his viewpoint on the prospect of the government of national unity in South Africa, especially at the time that there is still a lot of doubt lingering in the minds of South Africans as they await to see the outcome of this government of national unity that is harboring the African National Congress and the main opposition, opposition political party in South Africa, the Democratic Alliance. We want to, extend gratitude to you, Dr. Charles Sinkala, for your great insight on this very important topic, and we continue to watch events, how they unfold in South Africa, and how this new dispensation is going to shape or reshape the political landscape, and also bring some new impetus into aspects of governance in South Africa to chart the South African agenda, and why not this will transcend to other African countries that would pick positive aspects, which will continue to advocate or to solidify the push for total sovereignty, independence of African countries to be able to position itself very well in the world of multipolarity. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for always trusting the Pan-African television. It is for you, Media Africa, extending immense gratitude to the technical crew for also ensuring that the program was a success. And I will leave you by reiterating that it is another view of the world where nations are charting new dispensations, new policies that will fit with the changing times, that will meet, of course, the objectives, which is to transform the continent Africa and also transform the lives of Africans. Africa is indeed the future. Thank you so much. It is on this note that we draw the curtains into today's edition of Global Insight. Stay tuned for more on For You Media Africa. Bye-bye.